Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we delve further into the wisdom of meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like and share this audiobook, helping us expand. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for instant notifications when new content is released. Together, we can disseminate the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community dedicated to enlightenment and inner peace. Your participation in our mission to make these transformative teachings universally accessible is truly invaluable. Let's begin today's reading. Chickens from Hell. September 17, 2016. We like to feed on our thoughts, which is why we feed them. We gain entertainment from them. We gain help with our occupation in life, especially if we're employed in a job that rewards thinking. So to keep the thoughts going, we just keep feeding them. But as the Buddha noted, our thoughts then turn around and feed on us. In his words, they actually chew on us. We think we're getting the better part of the deal. We feed them, they give us nourishment of one kind or another. We tend not to notice how much they're eating away at us, and that we're actually getting the worst part of the deal. We notice that we're being eaten away, but we don't make the connection as to what's eating away at us. Often the thoughts that we feed on cause us a lot of trouble. If we're not discerning, we just gobble down everything that the mind churns up, identifying it as my thought, and thinking that I've got to make something with it. Sometimes we get totally chewed up by our thoughts, and yet then we turn around and keep feeding them some more. It's as if we had some chickens. We feed them so that they give us eggs, but it turns out they don't produce only eggs. They also produce chicken shit, and we don't know which is which. So we just gobble down everything that comes out of the chickens, and of course we get sick. At the same time, it turns out that they're the chickens from hell. They come and peck at us when we're not aware of it, like the birds in the Hitchcock film. The problem is that we don't make the connection. The chickens pecking at us are the ones we're feeding, so we keep on feeding them. One of the purposes of getting the mind into concentration is to step back from the whole process and learn to see it as it's happening. At the same time, we practice concentration to give the mind an alternative place to feed. Otherwise, we'll just keep feeding on whatever the chickens produce. When the Buddha provides analogies for different parts of the path, concentration is almost always the food. The RST jhana is grass and water. The fourth jhana is ghee and honey and lots of other good things. We need this kind of food because if the mind doesn't have something good to feed on, it's going to feed on whatever it can get. As the Buddha said, if you don't have a pleasure that's apart from sensuality, then no matter how much you understand the drawbacks of sensuality, you're going to go back and nibble on sensuality in secret. So try to develop a sense of ease and well-being with the breath as an alternative source of food. We talk today about rapture. That's actually the food of the concentration when you're really hungry. The pleasure is the kind of food for when you're not quite so hungry. And equanimity is the feeling you have when everything is satisfied. The different parts of the body that have been lacking energy now have their energy supplied, so you don't have to keep gobbling things down. So try to tune into a sense of well-being. Notice how you breathe and which parts of the body are especially sensitive to the breathing process. When you breathe in, what's the part that gets satisfied? What are the parts you're trying to satisfy as you breathe in? If you begin to notice that, then you can provide yourself with a sense of well-being very easily. Just go straight to those parts, and then, when they're satisfied, try to notice the parts that are not so obvious, but could use a dose of pleasure as well. It's as if you're sending food to different parts of the body. First you feed the ones that are clamoring the most. Then you try to spread the nourishment around to the quieter parts. As you're doing this, thoughts will come up that are not related to the concentration. Remind yourself that it's inevitable they'll come up, but it's not inevitable that you run with them. Make the distinction between which part of the thinking process is old karma and which is new. The old karma is the fact that you have these habits. You learn this language. You learn this way of talking to yourself, So it's only natural that the mind keeps churning out the same old stew with its random word generators and image generators. But the question of whether to believe the thought, whether to run with it, whether to accept it, that's new karma. So as soon as you're aware of the fact that you started running with these thoughts, drop them. That's a skillful action right there. And no matter how many times it takes, it's a habit you've got to learn how to develop. Think about all the many lifetimes you've spent just learning how to think. Learning how to master human language and enjoying the results, feeding on the results. Now you're going to learn a new habit, how not to run with a thought, and it's going to take time. This is why patience is so important in the practice. This goes against the grain. We like to think. We like to talk to ourselves. That's one of the ways the mind feeds. Now we're giving it new feeding habits, and, as always is the case with new habits, it takes a while to get used to them. So learn patience. And learn how to keep encouraging yourself. Try to develop some of the skills that are not taught in our educational system, which channels everybody into areas where they're talented. If you're not talented in pulling yourself out of your thoughts, especially if you've been talented about thinking, it's going to take a while to see that there's a talent in not thinking, and to actually like it. This requires patience and a kind of bounce-back attitude that no matter how many times you have to keep dropping your thoughts, you don't give up. You just keep on dropping them and coming back to the breath. As the mind gets a better and better sense of ease and well-being with the breath, it's going to be easier for you to pull yourself out of the thoughts. You begin to see that there are many stages in the formation of a thought, many stages in the new karma that encourages a thought. The quicker you are at recognizing the fact that the mind has slipped away and you're able to drop it, then the more you're going to see. Instead of hitting the thought at stage V, you start hitting it at stage 4, stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. Down to the point where it's just a little squirm of energy in the interface where the mind and the body meet. And that squirm of energy, it's hard to say whether it's physical or mental. But if you slap the perception on and say, oh, this is a thought, and it's a thought about the future, it's a thought about the past, it's a thought about this topic, that topic, then you run with it. In the very beginning stages, you're going to be aware of the thought only when it's fully formed. But as you get better and better at zapping it in time, catching it when it's just a squirm of energy or a little stirring of energy, then the more clearly you see the different stages. It's like a product being sent through the bureaucracy. The bureaucrat on this level puts a stamp on it, sends it to the next level. The next one puts a stamp on it and sends it up. If you can catch it the moment the product RST appears, then you have a lot more control over what's going on. This applies not only to idle thoughts, but also to strong emotions. The problem with strong emotions is that they take hold of the breath and zip right through the stages very quickly. You have to work on taking this process apart while you're meditating, but be alert to the fact that it's happening all day long. And especially with a strong emotion that you don't like, there's going to be a lot of denial around it. In other words, the RST bureaucrat will put the stamp on and then pretend it didn't happen. It's like kids passing a note through a classroom. Pass it on to the next person and then pretend you didn't do it. Pass it on to the next person, pretend you didn't do it. As long as you're willing to play along with the pretense, you're going to be stuck with fully formed thoughts, fully formed emotions, which you try to feed on as they chew you up. But if you can begin to sense the points in the process where this decision or that decision has been made, you can nip it in the bud. Then it's a lot easier to deal with. But all this requires that you have an alternative source of food. Feed of the directed thought and evaluation. Get interested in the issues of the breath. How do you make the breath energy really good? And what is the breath energy, anyhow? How do you sense when it's owing well and when it's not owing well? What ways of dealing with the breath improve your health? What ways wear you down? These are things that you can study, that are worth studying, because the breath can be medicine for the diseases of the body and the mind. It can help bring balance to a body that's out of balance or to a mind that's out of balance, because it's good nourishing food. A lot better than the chicken shit that we've been feeding of for so long. So meditation is a matter of learning new feeding habits that will be really good for you. And as for the chickens, you can let them starve. It's not that you won't be thinking anymore, but you realize that you've been feeding way too many chickens. At the same time, you get more and more discerning about which chickens are the ones that are actually feeding on you. Those you can stop feeding. At the same time, you also get more discerning about what's the chicken shit and what are the chicken eggs, so that when you have to think, you're eating only eggs. As you get really good at the meditation, you don't have to eat those either. They're still there. Awakening doesn't mean that you don't think anymore, but that you can do a lot of things with the eggs besides just eating them. You can ex food for other people. Meanwhile, you've got the food of your concentration. You've got the food that comes from getting the mind to settle down with a sense of well-being, feeding all the parts of the body that need breath energy each time you breathe in, and learning how to let that sense of being nourished spread out so that it seems to every cell in the body. That pulls you out of the vicious cycle of feeding the chickens and then having them come back to peck your eyes out at night. Ultimately, as the Buddha said, there comes a point where the mind doesn't have to feed anymore at all. The well-being of awakening, the well-being of release is totally free from any need to depend on conditions. It's described as a state that's free from hunger, not because you've told yourself not to be hungry, but because you've fully satisfied the mind. So that's where we're aiming. And we start by learning new feeding habits. They'll get you on the healthy path. Train your hunger, the sea squirt. November 11, 2016. There's a little animal called the sea squirt. It's not very big, and its most complex organs are its brain and its digestive system. After it's born, it moves around in the ocean and NDS a spot that it likes, where it senses that the food will be good. Then it stays there for the rest of its life. And one of the RST things it does after it's found its spot is to digest its brain, so it's just left with a digestive system, basically to show who's in charge. This is true not just for sea squirts. They've shown that when the brain makes its map of reality, a lot of the information, in fact the RST order of information, comes in from the digestive tract. All the signals about what you're hungry for, what you lack, drive you as you look to the world outside. A large portion of your map of reality is devoted to what's needed inside, in your gut, in your stomach. And you go out looking. This ties in with the Buddha's teachings on the fact that what denies us as beings is our need to subsist on food. We're constantly looking for the next meal. It's good to keep this point in mind. It's often forgotten. I've been reading some books on the Noble Eightfold Path, and the general message they give is that we suffer because we have the wrong map of reality. That inside we believe there's a permanent self, and outside we believe that there's a permanent happiness. And because of that wrong map, we make a lot of wrong decisions. We react to the world in the wrong way. So the solution they propose is to see, on the one hand, that there is no self, or no permanent self inside, and that outside nothing is permanent. As a result, you see that there's nothing worth going after, so you just give up, happy to be free from making any effort for any purpose. And that's supposed to be wisdom. You basically take an equanimous attitude toward things as they arise and pass away, knowing that ultimately everything's going to pass away, and that's it. Well, to give up feeding on the world out there simply because there's no permanent self, or because nothing out there is permanent, is like saying you're going to stop feeding on food because you realize that your stomach is impermanent and food is impermanent. That's not going to work. Our hunger drives us. As the Buddha said, it's our primary disease. If we can't get the food we want, well, we'll settle for something else. You see this with the coyotes. You look into their scat and sometimes you end plastic rope. They couldn't get the food they wanted, but they found something to stew it into their stomachs. And as long as our hunger is driving us, we're going to keep looking for food, even if it has to be plastic rope. So the solution doesn't lie simply in changing your map of the world outside or the world inside, To see that there's no permanent entity either inside or out, because that, of course, doesn't take into account the fact that your inside map is not telling you about permanent entities. It's telling you about hunger. And we don't hunger for food because we think we have a permanent self or that there's permanent food. We hunger for food, both physical and mental, because of our hunger pains. Our reaction to those pains is what we've got to train. We've got to train our hunger to be more discerning as to what's worth going after. We train it through virtue, concentration, and discernment. This will take time. It's like trying to wean yourself of sugar. It takes a while to grow used to not constantly getting, or going for, the quick hit of sugar. But once you've managed to stay away from it for a while, then you begin to realize that if you go back to eating sugar, it doesn't feel right anymore. It smells funny, tastes funny. It doesn't feel right inside you. In other words, you have to learn how to abstain for a while. And you abstain largely out of confidence that this is going to be good for you. But you also need some substitutes for the things you're abstaining from. The substitutes may actually be better for you, but it'll take a while to get used to them. It's the same with the precepts. We abstain from behavior that we might have felt like doing before. If we found pests in the house, we'd think it convenient to just kill them. Or to avoid awkward situations, we'd think it okay to tell little white lies. That kind of thing. But now we realize that we've got to abstain from these things 100%. There may be difficulties, but after a while we get used to the difficulties, and we actually end that we feel better. There's a greater sense of satisfaction that comes from holding to the precepts. And then when you see people engaging in little white lies, it really hits you hard, like the smell of sugar if you've been away from sugar for a while. You realize how unhealthy it is. The same with all the other little things that would go against the precepts. If you're able to abstain from them, you train your hunger in new directions. Rather than feeding the advantage of breaking the precepts, you feed the sense of self-esteem, the sense of well-being, the sense of harmlessness that comes from following the precepts. Even more so with concentration. You're totally retraining your hunger. You're knowing that there is a sense of well-being that can come simply from sitting here focusing on the breath, allowing the breath to get comfortable, allowing that sense of ease and well-being to spread through the body. As you get more skilled at it, you that you can tap into it whenever you need it. Then you can turn around and look at the food that you got, say, from sensual desire or ill will, or any of the hindrances, restlessness and anxiety, uncertainty, sleepiness. All the hindrances are a kind of food, but they're bad food. Junk food. Now that you see you've got a better source of food, a greater sense of well-being, you get more picky about your search for pleasure, your search for happiness, the things you want to feed of. Remember that, as the Buddha said, we soar in clinging, and the clinging is another word for taking sustenance. It's another word for feeding. As for discernment, the Buddha says there are things that you need to know if you want to discern the escape from this feeding cycle. Even though there may be some satisfaction in getting certain hunger satisfied, with a lot of them you realize that the effort that goes into them and the costs they entail are not worth it. And that's what discernment is all about. Learning how to let go by passing judgment on which ways of feeding are worth the effort and which are not. After you've fed the mind well on concentration, you begin to look at all the other things that would pull you out of concentration, and you see that there's greed or aversion or delusion involved in going after those things. So, to get past them, the RST step is to see, when the greed or the anger comes, how does it come? What's its origination? What's causing it? Then the second step is to see, when it goes away, how does it go away? But you don't just stop there though, just watching it coming and going away. Once you see the cause, the third step is to ask yourself, why do you go for that? What's the allure? What's the avor? What's the sense of being fed that you get out of that? And then the fourth step is to compare the allure with the drawbacks. If you feed this, what are the long-term consequences? It's a lot easier to see this in all fairness when you've fed the mind well with concentration, because otherwise it's going to go for Whatever hit it can end. And it's going to lie to itself about what the allure actually is. But when the mind is still, you're more likely to see the real allure. When it's well fed, you can see that the allure is very meager compared to the drawbacks. That's when you can drop it. You develop dispassion for it, which is the FTH step. The escape. And in addition to dispassion, you develop disenchantment, nibbida, which means the sense of having had enough of a certain food and not wanting it anymore. That combination of disenchantment and dispassion, that's the escape. And when you can apply this analysis in an all-around way, eventually even to your concentration, you're not escaping just to equanimity. You really escape from all the ways you fed, even on equanimity. The mind opens to another dimension where there's no hunger, where there's happiness, a sense of well-being that doesn't require that you feed. So you don't overcome your hunger for things simply by denying it. You need something better to feed on. But you have to train the hunger to appreciate that, because without the training in virtue, concentration, and discernment, the mind won't appreciate it at all. It's got to be put into a position where it can see the drawbacks of its old ways of feeding and realize that there's something better. So the way to let go is not to just deny your hunger, it's to train your hunger to make it more discerning, to ask yourself deep down inside, what do you really want out of life? What would really be satisfying? And notice how the answer to that question is going to change as you develop more virtue, concentration, and discernment, as your hunger gets trained to the point where it's no longer needed. So instead of digesting your brain, you get your intelligence to take over until it puts an end to your need for a digestive system. You end a happiness that's totally free from hunger, free from the need to feed, and that's when you let everything go, not out of defeat, out of victory. That attitude of giving up on consuming the world because you say, well, it's not permanent, and I'm not permanent, so I might as well give up looking for happiness. That's basically saying that there's no true happiness to be found through fabricated things, so just give up on the whole idea of happiness, and just be equanimous. That's defeat. As the Buddha said, though, one of the names for the Noble Eightfold Path is unexcelled victory in battle. You battle the ignorance that's been guiding your hunger, and you come out with something much better. You've learned that you can use the processes of fabrication to create a path that leads to something unfabricated. And that's genuine victory. We struggle in the world because of our hunger, but when we ND something that doesn't require feeding and totally satisfies the hunger, then there's no more need to struggle. As the Buddha said, better than victory over thousands of other people is victory over yourself, and this is how the victory is won. The Whole Elephant. February 16, 2016. You probably know the story of the blind people and the elephant. A king gets his men to gather up the blind people in the city, and then says, okay, show them an elephant. So some of the blind people touch the elephant's legs. Some touch his trunk. Some touch his tusks. Some touch his body. Some touch his tail. And depending on what they touched, they come to a conclusion about what an elephant is like. Some say the elephant's like a post. Or the elephant's like a granary, like a winnowing basket, like the pole of a plow. My favorite comparison comes from the ones who touch the tail and say, the elephant is like a broom. And then the blind people start in one another over whose image of the elephant is right, saying, it's like this. It's not like that. The creepy part of the story, of course, is that the king did this for his entertainment, and he's gratified by the sight of the blind people ting. What's even creepier, though, is that there's another version of the story in the Chinese canon, the same story, but interpreted differently. In the Pali canon, the blind people represent non-Buddhist sectarians. They don't know the Dhamma, and so they GHT over the Dhamma because they don't really know it. In the Chinese version, though, the blind people stand for all people, Buddhist or not, basically saying that even Buddhists are blind. There's nobody who can really know the Dhamma. All we know is winnowing baskets, brooms, granaries, and posts. We don't really know the elephant, and what's more, it's impossible for us to know the elephant. So we shouldn't GHT over our interpretations. Instead, we should just accept that some people see the elephant as a winnowing basket, so they have to content themselves with a winnowing basket, while you have to content yourself with your broom or your granary or whatever. And this version of the story is not just in the Chinese canon. It's still told to this day in all kinds of Buddhist sects. It's a really destructive take on the story because the implication is that nobody can ever know the Dhamma. It's too big. And the other implication, of course, is that you might as well stop trying to figure out which version of the Dhamma is right. It is true that there's an awful lot in the Buddha's awakening, much more than we can fathom. As he said, it's like a forest full of leaves, whereas what he taught was just a handful of leaves. But it is a handful. It's not too much to grasp. The handful contains everything important to know. And it's something we can get not only our hands but also our heads around. The Four Noble Truths. That's not all that much to comprehend. To paraphrase Ajahn Lee, there are people out there who can manage orchards of thousands of acres, and here we have just 4 noble truths, or 4 jhanas, and we can't get them straight. It's kind of embarrassing, the implication being, of course, that there's not all that much we have to master, so we should be able to master it. And we don't have to spend our whole lives always being blind. After all, the Buddha was one with eyes, the all-around eye, and one of his images for his act of teaching the path is that he's a doctor who can cure people of their blindness. You probably know that story as well. There's a blind man and someone gives him a cloth. It's a dirty old rag, but the person giving him the cloth says, "Here's a nice white piece of cloth. It looks really good on you." So the blind man takes good care of the dirty old rag, thinking it's a nice white piece of cloth. But then his friends and relatives take him to a doctor who can cure him of his blindness. As he gets his sight back, he looks at the cloth. He sees that it's a dirty old rag. What he thought was valuable was not. The gaining of sight, of course, is the gaining of the Dhamma eye, when you see that there is really something deathless, and it can be obtained through the path. So we're here to get over our blindness. And we have to take as our encouragement the principle that it is possible to get over our blindness. Don't listen to the people who say you can't. Just this evening, a magazine arrived in which someone was writing about how when he started on the Buddha's path, he was hoping for enlightenment, but what he got instead was awakening to the fact that there really is nothing to know. You should satisfy yourself with this state of not knowing, he said. That, again, is a destructive way of thinking. There is something to know. And when you know it, it makes a huge difference. To begin with, it confirms the fact that your actions really do make a difference in your life. You know that if you hadn't acted on the path, you wouldn't have reached the deathless. You wouldn't have seen the deathless. And you also see, in stepping out of space and time, just how long this process of sewering has gone on. That gives you all the more encouragement to do what you can to get past it, to complete the practice, even though you realize that in gaining this vision you've already cut out a lot of the sewering you would have had to go through if you hadn't gained this vision, this eye, this sight. But still, you gain a glimpse of what it's like to be totally free of sewering. Just the act of being in the 6 senses, being immersed in the world of the space and time in the 6 senses. There's a lot of sewering there. That's what motivates you to get rid of the sewering still remaining. So take heart in the fact that, however blind you may feel around the path, blindness can be cured. This is what the Noble Eightfold Path is all about. If you develop right view all the way through right concentration, these qualities enable you to see more clearly. And here, again, think about that interpretation of the story of the elephant. If you say that everybody's blind and they have to content themselves with winnowing baskets and brooms and whatnot, there seems to be no right or wrong. But right view really differs from wrong view, and it's right because it works. It really does form a part of the path to the deathless that takes you out of your blindness. Right resolve is right because it works, and so on down all the factors of the path. That's why the Buddha included it in his handful of leaves and why he would have distinguished the leaves in his hand from the dirty left on the ground. The more mindful you are when you've learned a lesson that helps you to see more clearly, the more concentrated the mind, the more still you are, then the more you can see what's going on inside. And even before you hit the deathless, you're able to see parts of your mind that were hidden in blind spots up to that point. So we're here to see and to develop the qualities of mind that enable us to see. The right view that has us look at the right spot, the right ear that helps to clear away the things that get in the way of our seeing, and the right concentration that gives us an all-around vision. We get the mind centered, and, once it's properly centered, it can look around itself because you not only see the object that you're focused on when you concentrate, but you also begin to see the activities of the mind as they relate to the object. That's what you want to see. You want to see what you're doing. This is the big blind spot in our lives. And it's very ironic. It's right close to us what we're doing, our intentions for why we're doing things, so you'd think we would see these things clearly. But we have a tendency to hide them from ourselves, or just to get interested in other things, farther away, so much so that we don't see what we're doing. When we practice, we're turning the spotlight on the right spot. What are you doing right now? What's the intention behind it? How are you doing it? How skillfully are you doing it? To what extent are you giving rise to stress, pain, disease, or disturbance by what you're doing? And how can you get the mind more still to step back from those activities? See which actions are unskillful so that you can drop them. See which ones are skillful so you that can keep doing and developing them until they've done the work. As we keep following this path, the Buddha said, eventually it will take us to a place that we haven't seen before, to see the as yet unseen. It's unseen not because it's unseeable, but simply because we haven't looked in the right place. We haven't looked properly. We don't have the right vision yet, the right capacity to see it. But that's something that can be developed, because someday we really will see the whole elephant, and we can throw away our concepts of winnowing baskets, granaries, and brooms. Of course, it's not just a matter of seeing. The Buddha also gives us ways of checking our seeing. You know the story, too, of the elephant hunter looking for a bull elephant in the forest. He sees the tracks of an elephant, but he doesn't immediately jump to the conclusion that this has got to be a bull elephant. But still, the tracks look likely, so he follows them. He sees scratch marks in the trees, but again he doesn't jump to the conclusion that this has to be a bull elephant. He's looking for a bull elephant because he needs one to do some heavy work. When he saw the footprints, he knew that they might come from dwarf females with big feet. He sees the scratch marks. These might come from tall females with tusks. Only when he actually sees the elephant does he know that he's got the bull elephant he wants. The footprints and the scratch marks stand for the various stages on the path. The development of concentration, the development of some of the psychic powers that come from concentration. But the vision of the deathless, that's the whole elephant. And it's something human beings can see. I was talking with a scholar recently who was saying that he didn't think that any conditioned human being could see the deathless. As far as he was concerned, all human beings were conditioned beings, so how could a conditioned being see anything unconditioned? But he was thinking backwards. The Buddha's approach wasn't to know what a human being is and then, from that definition, to decide what human beings can and can't know. Instead, he looked at what human beings can do and what they can know as the result of their actions. And looking this way took him to a place that really was unconditioned. That's when he realized that denying yourself as being this, that, or the other thing is placing a limitation on yourself. This ranges from anything as simple as the idea that I am innately good or I am innately bad up to whatever I am you might choose. If you're going to choose a provisional I am, choose an I am that says, I am capable of changing the way I act and of awakening. That one will get you through. And you know that you have the capacity to see the whole elephant when the whole elephant appears. That's the proof that you don't always have to be blind. Fire escapes. April 7, 2016. A rainy night like this forces your attention inside. If you send your mind out, you run into the rain and the cold, so you bring it back in. Try to inhabit your body fully. Think of your awareness as having a shape like the body, and that it LLS every part of your physical body. You're aware in your toes, you're aware in your legs, you're aware in your hips, torso, your head, your arms, everything. You fully inhabit this space. And how do you know this space? You know it through the breath energy. There's the in and out breath, but then there are also the more subtle energies that out throughout the body, throughout the nerves and the blood vessels, out to every pore. See how fully you can inhabit the space denied by the breath. Back into it. Feel it all around you. This helps to pull you away from your concerns about things outside. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations. If you can inhabit this space with a sense of well-being, you ask yourself, why go out? The mind may come up with its reasons. But when you examine those reasons, you see that a lot of them have little real substance. They may be convincing if you glance at them, and this is how you often fall for a lot of things happening in the mind. A glancing idea comes in and then it's gone. You pick up something out of it, something that has you intrigued, and you wonder what you missed. The thought seems more impressive and more convincing than it would if you were able to look at it full on. So, try to be full on with your body right now. You realize that if there's going to be any happiness, any really solid happiness, you've got to end it in here. As the Buddha said, the problem of soaring is here. But the solution is also here. The end is here. Someone once asked him about how big the universe was. And the Buddha replied that you could spend your whole life, even if you had an amazing ability to stride great strides, you could go for 100 years. And you'd still never get to the end of the universe. You would die RST. But the end of the universe, in terms of the soaring of the universes of all your becomings, he says, can be found in here. You don't have to go out there. So, stay in here. Get to know this space really fully. The end of soaring is to be found in this fathom-long body. That doesn't mean that it's going to be found in your liver or stomach. It means that your awareness right here, your awareness that LLS the body right here, is where there will be an opening to something that's beyond the universe. This explains one of the ironies of the practice. We're told that the body is ennui with aging, illness, and death, and yet this is where we're told to center ourselves. You might think that if you could somehow get out of the body, that would be the end, but it's not. You'd become a wandering spirit. But if you stay right here where this awareness is, things will begin to open up. This is where the re-escape is. In fact, what we're doing right now as we're practicing right concentration is learning about this re-escape. One of the terms for right concentration is jhana, which is related to the verb jayati, which means to be absorbed, but also means to burn with a steady aim, like the aim of an oil lantern. When you think of the re of your senses, the res in the eyes, in the ears, in the nose, in the tongue, in the body as they engage with the outside world, there's a direct verb for that kind of burning. It's the burning of a wood re, where the aims leap up and lick out and ichor all over the place. As they leap around, they cast strange shadows on the wall. They create all kinds of misunderstandings at the same time that they're burning away. Whereas if you have the light of an oil lantern or an oil lamp, the aim is steady. And when the aim is steady, you see things clearly. You can even read by it. So try to make your mind steady right here. Turn the re of the senses from an ichering re into a clear, steady one. Find a spot in the body where it feels good, where the breath energy feels nourishing. Calming when you need to be calmed, energizing when you need to be energized. Get a sense that the energy is as still as possible, your mind is as still as possible, and that's when you can read things clearly inside. In particular, you start reading the instructions for the re-escape. Some of those instructions come in what the Buddha taught, but often the instructions are right here. All you have to do is to apply what the Buddha calls appropriate attention. You're looking for where there's stress, and particularly where the stress comes and goes, and asking yourself, what am I doing at the same time that the stress comes? What I am doing at the same time that it goes? You begin to notice that there are certain actions in the mind, even as the mind is getting still. In fact, it's because the mind is getting still that you can see these subtle actions more clearly. The majority of the mind is still, but there'll be a little ickering here and there. And you want to notice to what extent that ickering is related to the stress coming and going. If you see that the ickering and the stress come and go at the same time, then you look further. What is that? What did the mind do just then? What kind of perception appeared? What kind of thought appeared? What kind of intention? Where was it going? And what can you do to let go of it? Now, there are two ways of letting go. One is letting go for the time being, and the other is a letting go that goes deeper. For that deeper letting go, you have to start looking more carefully at what the allure of the perceptions is. Why do you want to get engaged in them? Then, when you see the allure, you can also start looking at the drawbacks. Given that the perception adds to the level of stress in the mind, is it worth going with? When you can contemplate this in a way that allows you to see that the allure is not worth it, that's when you gain the escape. RST from the ickering aims, and then from the steady aim of jhana itself. So there's a map right there. Right in your own mind. Of course your directions for how to read the map come from what you've learned about what the Buddha had to say. In fact, this is a common image throughout the texts. That the Buddha's giving us escape instructions. There's a sutta where a man comes to see Ven Ananda and asks for a door to the deathless. Where do you end the door to the deathless? And Ananda starts giving him a list, citing the different levels of right concentration. The 4 jhanas, the 4 Brahma Viharas, and 3 of the formless states. Then he explains how to analyze each of these states, so that you can go beyond even the steady aim of concentration, to an experience of the deathless. The going out of the aims. So the man ends up with 11 doors, which he compares to 11 escapes from a burning house. There's some overlap in the list. The 4 Brahma Viharas are another way of getting the mind into jhana, because even with them, you have to practice developing concentration with directed thought and evaluation, without directed thought and evaluation, with a sense of pleasure, with a sense of rapture, with a sense of equanimity. In other words, you take these attitudes through the jhanas. The 3 formless attainments in night space, in night consciousness, nothingness build on the 4th jhana. Even though they're formless, they're all right here. Where do you experience them? You experience them right where you're experiencing the body right now. See that the breath gets really rened. Your mind gets very still, and all the energy channels in the body get connected up, so that there's less and less of a need to breathe air in from the outside. Whatever oxygen exchange needs to happen will happen at the skin. And when your mind is really still, the brain isn't using that much oxygen, so you don't feel a need to breathe at all. It's not that you're trying to stay the breath or stop it. It just falls silent on its own as things get connected up. As you can maintain that state and stay balanced there, you begin to notice that your sense of the edge of the body where the body ends and outside space begins to dissolve. You realize that, with the movement of the breath still, the only thing holding your sense of the shape of the body is just a perception. If you can drop that perception of the form and stay right here, you don't go anywhere else. You begin to sense the body as a mist, as a cloud of little sensation drops. Then you see that it's easier to focus, or more quiet to focus, on the space between the drops. And then you sense that there's no limit to that. That's what they mean by a night space. It's not that you go out and check the edge of how far it goes out toward infinity, but simply that you don't sense any limit to it. So it's all right here. And this, too, is one of the re-escapes, because this, too, you can analyze to see what perceptions in this state still disturb the mind. What's their allure? How can you let that allure go by comparing it to the drawbacks? We're ending a re-escape here in the midst of the re. You don't have to look anywhere else. As for all the Dhamma teachings that have nothing to do with the re-escape, you can just let them go. I was given a lecture a while back by someone who was quoting an academic, saying that to teach that there's a right Dhamma and a wrong Dhamma is a very dangerous thing. The analogy the person gave was that the Dhamma's like a map. Everybody's Dhamma is like a different map. And as we all know, all maps distort reality to one extent or another, so there's no one true map. No one map that corresponds to all of reality. We have to accept the fact that everybody's map is full of distortions and no one's is really right. But that's a false analogy. What the Buddha's giving is instructions on how to end the re-escape. You can go anywhere in the world, any hotel in the world, and the maps to the re-escapes are all the same. Regardless of the culture, regardless of how fancy or unfancy the hotel. It's all the same sort of information. And the maps all serve the same purpose. They don't have to tell you how the hotel was built or what's in the walls or what's in the foundations. All they have to tell you is where you go to get out. That type of information is all very standard, and it's presented in a simple, standard way, so that it's useful when you really need it. The maps tell you just the information you need to know for that one purpose, and that's all. And there can be good and bad maps, right and wrong maps, to the re-escape. Some diagrams could put you in a dead-end corner where you'd be consumed by aims or asphyxiated by the smoke. Others take you to a door where, when you open the door, it drops for 5 feet. So you want to avoid those maps. But other maps actively show you the way to safety. Those maps are right for their purpose. What we've got here is the map of the Noble Eightfold Path. The map about right concentration and its 7 supports, its 7 requisites. In addition, there are instructions on how to use right concentration, how to analyze what's going on in the concentration, so that we can begin to understand how the mind puts Uring together, and how we can start taking it apart. That's the map to the re-escape. That's how you get out of the re. That's all you need from the map. So it's all right here. And there's a right way and a wrong way of trying to get out of right here. One very wrong way is to tell yourself, I'm going to stay here forever, so learn to see that the aims are beautiful. If you believe that, you're going to get engulfed. So realize that we're in a burning building, this house of the body we have here, these burning senses. But the escape lies within. It lies in learning how to separate things out. You have the body here. You've got the breath here, but also the awareness here. And for a long time during the practice of concentration, it's going to seem like they're one. But as you begin to see that your sense of the body is something you've put together out of different sensations, and you don't have to keep doing that, that allows you to maintain the awareness right here, without feeling con-ed by the body. And then you can analyze the feeling of space, or your perception of space, so that you're not con-ed by anything at all, not even the perceptions that hold you in concentration. So everything you need is right here. The escape is right here. But to end the escape, you also have to understand what you're doing that keeps setting re to the mind, and to learn how to stop that. And there's a right way and a wrong way of doing that. This is why, when you gain instructions in the Dhamma, you look at the people who are giving the instructions. When scholars say that there's no right or wrong Dhamma, you look at how well they are practicing. They're just reading the books. And for them, reading the books is enough. That's a sign of something really wrong right there. It's as if they didn't have the problem of sewering, or that they don't recognize they have the problem of sewering, or that they don't take any interest in the idea that maybe there could be an end to this, even though that's what the best texts are all talking about. Are those the kind of people you want to follow? You look at the Ajahns. They might not have the degrees, they may not be as widely read, but they take the Buddha seriously. That sewering is a big problem, but there's a way out. That's what the Four Noble Truths are all about. They're not just 4 interesting statements about sewering. They're an announcement that this is the big problem in life and here's the solution. So it's up to you how much you want to be in tea from that teaching, how much you want to be in tea from that announcement. But if you are looking for an escape, this is where you're going to end it. 240. Passion, dispassion, compassion. January 15, 2010. There's a Pali term, raga, which is usually translated as passion. And there's its opposite, viraga, or dispassion. There are areas in which raga or passion is a good thing. Passion for the Dhamma is a good thing. The desire to practice, the desire to attain the results of the practice. Having a passion for these things is something the Buddha actually encouraged. But otherwise, raga is something you've got to watch out for, because it's a major cause of zuering. That means that an important stage of the practice, an important attainment, is the ability to develop viraga. First, there's dispassion for sensual desires. We're more in love with our sensual desires than we are with the actual pleasures. The pleasures come and we're not satisfied. So we want more, and then we're obsessed with our desires for these things. You can elaborate your desires for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, relationships, whatever, for days on end. Then the actual pleasure comes and it's not really all that much. Yet when the Buddha points this fact out, everybody says, "Oh, you're just bad," mouthing the pleasure. But when you look at it, there's really not that much there. Ajahn Lee's images of a dog chewing on a bone and getting nothing but its saliva, and yet it's obsessed with its saliva, drinking down the saliva, thinking that it's getting food. Then there's dispassion for form and for formlessness. In other words, once you've mastered jhana, then you develop dispassion for it. It sounds kind of sad, doesn't it? You master it and then you're no longer obsessed with it. You have to go beyond it. People don't like to hear that, or think about the implications of dispassion. It sounds like we're trying to become numb, indifferent, without energy, as if passion were the only energy that we have to keep us going. Well, in some ways, yes, it is. The fact that we keep going after things, the energy we put into fabricating things, is what keeps the whole process of fabrication going, along with all the stress that comes with fabrication. Yet this sort of passion is something that society encourages. We're happy to play along and don't like to think that we're misguided. So we tend to paint a picture that dispassion must be some horrible gray state. But as the Buddha said, dispassion is the highest dhamma, the highest phenomenon, and leads to the ultimate happiness, the ultimate clarity of mind, the ultimate unconditioned happiness, where you don't have to keep creating things. You don't have to keep salivating all the time. You've actually got something that's really fulfilling. But to get there requires that you abandon your taste for all the other things that get in the way. Most of us practice with the idea we'd like to collect new pleasures to add to our store, and meditation is simply another pleasure to throw in with the other ones. We'd like to have our cake and eat it, too, and have a few more cakes put aside, ready to consume as a midnight snack. But the extent to which we keep pursuing other things gets in the way of our pursuit of true happiness. You've got to look at it that way. And the passion that keeps us creating these other forms of pleasure that then let us down. You've really got to realize that it's not all that fulfilling. This requires a real shift in our orientation, because we do identify ourselves around the pleasures that we look for, the pleasures in sensuality. You identify yourself as a person who likes this particular sensual pleasure, that particular sexual orientation, this type of food, that type of music. A huge amount of our identity is misentered there. And it's difficult to step back and look at our identity as something to let go of, because we feel that if we don't have that identity, we're nothing, regardless of how much the Buddha says that to let go of that particular identity is no great loss. He goes even deeper into our ideas. It's interesting that in the pattern of the different levels of passion that get abandoned, sensual passion goes RST, and then it's passion for form and formlessness, which can include not only the states of jhana, but also abstract ideas and ideals. He's asking us to step back from our identification with those as well. That's scary, too. We feel that if we abandon our ideals, we're betraying them. But if we abandon passion for them, we aren't betraying them. It's still possible to act on compassion. It's still possible to act on empathetic joy without passion. You maintain these motivations because they're the right thing to do. You have compassion, and this is where English plays a trick on us. Compassion, in terms of its etymology, means you feel the same thing, or you feel with somebody else. When somebody is zuering, compassion of that sort is a painful emotion. You feel part of their pain as well. For most of us, we live in a state of obsession with our pleasures, so that only if we feel somebody else's pain will we turn from our pleasures and focus on helping them. But a mind free from passion doesn't need that pain in order to be helpful. You see that they're suffering and you want to help. That's it. You don't have to feel pain along with the people. You just see that it's the right thing to do. The Buddha calls compassion of this sort an ornament of the mind that's become cleansed of its passions. So it's not that you become hard-hearted or unfeeling. It's simply that you don't need the same play of emotions, the same play of feelings, in order to get yourself to do the right thing. As I said, when most people are passion for a particular pleasure, the only thing that will peel them away from that to notice other people is the pang that comes when you see that they're suffering. It hits you. It disturbs your pleasure, so you've got to do something to work on that in order to get back to your equilibrium, or to get back to the pleasure that you're fascinated with. That's normal motivation. So when we hear of another kind of motivation, the motivation of an awakened mind, it seems strange and alien. But as the Buddha said, it's the most active kind of compassion there is, where your mind is not pained. You're not trying to work over your pain and helping someone else. In other words, your identity doesn't get involved. Then, Ananda once made an observation related to this point. He was talking with Ven Sariputta. Sariputta had been commenting on how he'd reacted one day in his meditation. Is there anyone whose death would affect his state of mind? And he realized there was no one. Ananda asked, well, what about the Buddha? You wouldn't get disturbed if the Buddha passed away? And Sariputta replied, I'd react that it's a sad thing that such a being has to pass, but then everybody has to pass. And Ananda made an interesting comment. It's because of your lack of conceit that you wouldn't grieve over that, the loss of the Buddha. A lot of our compassion is tied up in conceit. There has to be a feeling of pain, that it's your pain. Your sense of self gets involved in one way or another, in order to act in a compassionate way, in a helpful way. We're so used to it that we don't notice it. And we also don't like the idea that our compassion is selfish, which is another reason why we don't notice it. But it's there. And it's good to recognize that and good to realize that it would be beneficial for everybody involved if you could still be compassionate without that conceit, where your compassion is simply an ornament of the mind. So thinking in these ways helps you to realize that some of the qualities we see as good in ourselves are not totally good, and that the admixture of passion actually creates problems. We're so used to having passion mixed up with everything good in our lives that we feel that a state of dispassion would strip the mind of its goodness. So it's wise to stop and think. Actively use your imagination to think in these other terms, because the good done by a mind that doesn't need conceit in order to do that good contains a lot of genuine goodness. The compassion that comes from a mind that has found true happiness, total happiness, the happiness inside that doesn't have to depend on conditions, is a very different kind of compassion from the compassion that requires conceit. So try to stretch your imagination every now and then. Look at the ways in which you feed on things to end your happiness. And learn to look at their drawbacks, so that the possibility of a happiness that doesn't need to feed, that doesn't need to be driven by passion, becomes more and more attractive. This kind of thinking gives more and more motivation to the practice, so that someday you'll know what it's like to end the happiness that comes with dispassion. Because you've opened your mind to the possibility that it could be a good thing. In alignment with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the tremendous significance of sharing wisdom widely. At present, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page work into a user-friendly audio format. The responsibility to advance this noble endeavor now lies with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and the sharing of our content, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's continue the age-old tradition of knowledge dissemination and the nurturing of mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We wholeheartedly invite you to join us in this undertaking, and together, we can effect profound and positive changes in the lives of many.